Greetings sailors, welcome back to World of Warships, and here is the much promised Izumo game. Well, I say much promised, I think I've mentioned it like twice, that I was hoping to get a good replay of this, and this is okay. It's a decent game, but there's nothing particularly special or flashy or spectacular about it. But the thing is, that's been 100% of my Izumo games so far. There's been nothing particularly great where I could point at it and go, yeah, look at this action that's going on right now. They've all been relatively the same. And the Izumo gets a lot of hate. Is hate too strong a word? I don't know. Because of its unusual turret configuration. And I find I don't hate it. I find it tremendously awkward a lot of the time. But as long as you at all times take into consideration the fact that you really do have to be, as far as possible, pointed bow towards people, and as long as you resist the temptation to turn your ship enough to get that third turret on target, especially against other battleships, because a lot of the time that's just a bad idea, then it's alright. It's got some nice 16-inch guns, I believe they are. They're pretty hard hitting, but it's just that turret configuration, and that's why people hate it. Now, as you can see, I started off by, yes, rear-ending this New Orleans. It's not a great start. I really didn't notice he was there somehow. I was so concentrated on looking at the back of my own turrets that I failed to realise there was a ship right in front of me. But, yeah, this game otherwise was quite a nice game. And there's actually going to particularly be some nice communication in the chat. There's going to be some nice teamwork with my fellow battleships with some of these cruisers. This group of ships over here in particular, we were actually working together quite well, which is unusual enough in a random battle. So on that basis alone, this is a nice game. But I was also able to put the Izumo to good work, because there's no carriers for me to worry about, there's no tier 10s for me to worry about. This was a top tier game, so it was a good recipe, but even a good recipe in the Izumo is still an awkward recipe, if that makes any sense. Now, the reason why I am showing this from the very beginning, I mean, normally I cut off the first, like, 2.5, 3 minutes of a game to get right to the action, is, of course, we've had patch 5.3. So I'm going to actually use the extra time to talk about the highlights of patch 5.3. I'm going to put a link in the description to the actual patch notes. I recommend you read them because there's a lot in this time round, but I'll try and cover the kind of the headlines, as it were. So one of the big things that's been introduced is team battles, and this is actually a bit different from World of Tanks. It's almost like a mini clan. You can have up to 10 people in a team. You can be in up to 3 teams, and again, this New Orleans. And now that time he kind of ran into me, so I don't know. But yeah, but actually, in the battles themselves, it's 7 per team, and then you've got 3 as a reserve, basically. So it's almost like a Clan Wars team kind of thing. And these teams have ratings. And there we go, he bumps into the North Carolina as well. So it's not really like anything that there is quite in World of Tanks. It's somewhat like the 742 format, the 742 team battles, but not quite. So I've not had any direct experience of that yet. I know a couple of people that have and have really enjoyed it, and really enjoyed it on the test server. Hopefully I can find a team to be in with sooner rather than later. I could even start my own team, although it's getting enough people together. Because I know a few people that play World of Warships, but not enough to get together a whole team. And maybe I could get enough circlings together, but it would... I don't know if enough circlings play this game, because I don't... Just do clan integration already, for crying out loud. Wargaming is where I'm going with that. Anyway, so yeah, team battles. Team battles are a thing. I'm going to have to try those at some point. There's a new map, and there's also a bunch of tweaks to existing maps. So the new map is something, I can't remember what it's called, but it's desert themed. It's supposed to be North African coast. And obviously there was a lot of action going on in the Mediterranean generally, so it's a nice bit of variety to have the North African coastline represented in the game. Captain skills has been another really big area, and by the way, I'm doing this in order that they're on the actual the change list. So yeah, captain skills. There's a couple of new ones. Some of them have been substantially reworked. Some cruisers took a big hit because basic firing training, advanced firing training, and whatever the turret turn one's called, expert marksman. I think that sounds right. They are now basically for primary weapons, player-controlled weapons, only of use to destroyers. Or, well, they're of most use to destroyers. The two, AFT and BFT, are of most use to destroyers. The turret turn time, obviously, you still get a slight bonus. I think it's less than a degree per second, so it's still going to be worth it on some ships. But there are a couple of cruisers in particular that are going to be hit quite hard by that. And the Mikhail Kutuzov would have been one of them, except they buffed it. So it now has, I think, the same range, at the very least, of what it would have if you had a captain with AFT previously. So that one didn't miss out. But the Megami did, in particular, because one of the options that you have with the Megami is you can have 8-inch guns, or you can have... What are the 152 mils in inches? Is that 7 inches? I don't know. Whatever, you know, size of gun that is. That was a popular option on the Megami, to use those instead of the 203 mil guns, the 8 inches. That is now not an option, and the Megami, as far as I know, didn't get any compensatory buffs to any of its characteristics. So Megami drivers are a bit salty about that, and I don't blame them. But otherwise, I'm more or less okay with the changes as it relates to AFT and BFT, and they still apply to secondaries of any caliber. So something like the Izumo, it's still really useful having those, because they affect all of your secondary weapons. So even though they might be bigger than, what was it, 139 mil, it doesn't matter in terms of secondaries, so that's nice. But yeah, there's a bunch of other captain skills, and oh yes, there goes my turret. That, by the way, is one of the great joys of the Izumo. If you lose your turret, and you can fairly easily, the third turret's flush with the deck, but the other two turrets are sitting on little, I don't know what you'd call those, but armoured, you know, things that they sit on, because the front two turrets are super firing. But because, I mean, the actual turrets themselves are quite, you know, thickly armoured, but because they're sitting on these less armoured thingies, that's the technical term, right? I've had this happen once or twice already, and it's incredibly frustrating with this ship in particular, because that's half my frontal firepower going right there. So anyway, back to the change list. So yeah, there's been some interesting new additions though, including the ability to actually put on a captain skill, which gives you better secondary accuracy, and I think damage as well, I'm not sure, and AA accuracy and damage. Again, actually, it might not be damage. I would have to double check that one, in fact. But that's going to be useful for a lot of cruisers, in particular, AA cruisers. The secondaries one, obviously, very useful for a ship with good secondaries like the Izumo. But I'm probably unlikely to get it, because there's a bunch of other skills that have changed around as well. So for a complete, I mean, like, this is just the barest overview. iChase Gaming in particular has done a video. I'm sure other people have done videos going over the captain skills in more detail. And there's also at least one post on Reddit where somebody's gone through and tried to rank them in terms of usefulness. And what Wargaming has done, to their credit, is they've basically given everybody free captain skill resets, because some of these changes to captain skills are substantial. There's been a whole host of ship balancing and changes, and that includes to things like not just the actual hard stats of the ships, but a bunch of them got slight buffs or nerfs in terms of profitability and XP gain as well. In particular, some of the carrier loadouts were changed, and US carrier torpedo, not torpedo bombers, dive bombers for, I think, tiers 8, 9 and 10 got a buff. So those top tier US dive bombers are actually a lot more potent now. I think they get like 1,000-pound bombs, so they do more damage these days. And I think some of the loadouts changed as well to maybe reflect this change. Now, there's actually one of the new captain skills that relates to not only destroyers but also carrier captains because it increases the speed of your torpedoes, but it's at the sacrifice of range. But for carriers in particular, it means they have, because they move faster, you actually have to drop them slightly further away because they have a longer arming time, essentially. Or because they're going through the water faster, you have to drop them further away for the same arming time. So effectively, yeah, your torp range increases, but the speed of those torpedoes increases. And it actually means that you might end up with a tighter spread. And I think I remember iChase saying it's probably more useful for Japanese carrier captains than it is for the American carrier captains. But I don't know. I haven't actually tested that out myself. I do still have a Bogue sitting around. Hell, I think the Langley actually got a new loadout. The Langley now gets a 111 loadout, the tier 4. So you could probably even test it out with the Langley, potentially. AA got a massive rework. The entire AA system, I think, got looked at, and they also did a lot of stuff, not only with how the damage calculations work, but how the actual what the actual guns do damage-wise. So AA guns and the AA system as a whole got a rework, and this is one of the things I knew coming into the patch, that it was going to be a patch where AA would get a look at. So some battleships and cruisers have ended up being quite big winners, and of course with some of the new captain skills, especially the one to manually, you know, the AA will only fire at targets that you manually select, you know, with the control click, then yeah, you could end up with some very, very powerful AA cruisers indeed. Now sadly there is no word on if there's been buffs to the profitability of actually going around being an AA cruiser. There's absolutely no mention in the patch notes of whether they've changed the XP and credit reward for protecting your teammates from aerial stuff, which for both carriers and cruisers, that's been a bugbear of mine for a long time. The game just does not reward that, and especially in terms of some of the US cruisers at the higher tiers, where AA is their speciality, and in fact the Germans are very good at it as well. It still needs looking at. It really does, because you're sacrificing your chance to go off and do damage by sticking near a battleship and giving them AA cover potentially, but with very little in the way of reward. So that's still a big issue. They haven't changed that as far as I know. Control clicking, well, I've talked about the new captain skills and how control clicking to select a target, you know, if you've got those captain skills, you can do more damage and your accuracy increases. They've nerfed it otherwise, though. If you don't have those captain skills, they've actually reduced the effectiveness of that skill. And as far as I know, it's for both secondaries and anti-aircraft guns. So it's before it used to be a pretty reasonable increase in firepower from actually control clicking. It's not as much these days. It's still more than if you're just letting your secondaries fire at whatever the hell they want, but that has taken a bit of a nerve. So I guess that's to maybe get people into using the captain skill, except the captain skills are rank 4 and 5 respectively, so you're not going to have them on quite a lot of captains. If you want those skills, you're going to have to come up with a captain skill build that kind of specifically gets you up there, and it's going to mean sacrificing some other useful skills along the way, basically. So, yes, I do hope at some point they maybe think about giving the captains a couple more captain points to play with effectively, because you have to give up a lot to get some of these higher rank ones, and some of them are just still quite situational, and personally I err on the side of having captain skills that are more useful the majority of the time, rather than having a captain skill that's really useful but only, like, you know, 5% of the time of all the battle time I play, because that just seems like a waste of captain points to me. But anyway, maybe they'll come back to that in future. Let's see, there's been some changes to ranked battles, to the interface, and quite a nice little change is also when you go into a battle, you actually end up with the last selected shell type from whatever your previous battle was. So that's quite nice. You don't have to, especially if you're loading in late to a game, as long as you ended a battle with your preferred shell for whatever ship you're in. I mean, obviously this is more of a thing for battleship captains, but it means you don't have to spend an extra 30 seconds or whatever reloading your guns at the start of every match. because you didn't quite load in time to get to the countdown timer. Next, low tier matchmaking was changed, so they've actually created almost 2 separate matchmakers for the low tiers, and this is to prevent some of the seal clubbing. I mean, basically, they don't have any details, but if you've done over a certain number of battles, you get lumped in with, you know, all the more experienced players. But if you're a new player, you get matchmaking with other new players. So it's trying to make it a more friendly environment for newer players. And I think Warships does a better job of that than World of Tanks, quite frankly. I mean, I think that's supposed to be the case in World of Tanks as well. But of course, in Warships also, you've got the co-op mode, so people can use that as their training wheels to get the hang of the game. And World of Tanks doesn't have that at all. So I think overall, and just the nature of the game, means this is as long as you like the nature of the game, it's more newcomer friendly and more fair in a lot of ways than World of Tanks can be. They've actually also made another important change to the matchmaking. It will try and balance across the teams based on nationalities. So it won't be quite so much one team having like 4 Kageros and your team having 4, I don't know, Ognavoys or something. That was a strange example because one's like tier 9, one's tier 6. But you see what I mean. It will try and... with this completely absurd example I've just picked, it'll give one team 2 Kageros and one team 2 Ognomoys and vice versa for the other team. Now, of course, divisions can still mess this up, but matchmaking will now try at least give a parity of the nations, and particularly as regards to destroyers, that's quite handy, because if one team gets all the Japanese destroyers, say, and another team has all Russian destroyers, which will completely get spotted by the Japanese destroyers every day of the week, that's a phrase, right? Then that's a nice change. So yeah, the matchmaking is still not perfect in this game, but that's a good improvement. There's been some changes to the sound engine, and I think there's probably also been some back-end changes to the game engine generally, but the sound engine specifically is mentioned, and I think they've put some new gun sounds and stuff in. Nothing like as dramatic as the new sound engine coming up in the next patch of World of Tanks, on the changes to the sounds in World of Tanks. Actually, I think the sound engine's already in place now in World of Tanks, but yeah, it's a change. You might notice some of your guns sound different. There's also been some, again, back-end changes with mods. They've introduced some kind of system whereby the game client can check if a mod is digitally signed or not. So presumably Wargaming at some point is going to, I don't know, approved modders will get some kind of digital signature, or they can apply, and Wargaming can go, yep, this mod isn't malicious, it isn't breaking any rules, it's okay to use with the game, and the client will recognise that fact. But there's been very little detail in that. And lastly, there's a new account level. Level 12, and that's what you need to take part in these team battles. So if you already were at the stage where you were at level 11 already, getting to level 12 gives you a nice, it's like 3 million credits or something. So I kind of logged in the first time and hey, 3 million credits, it was very nice. So I've actually managed to talk most of this battle just about the changes. Like, there's so much stuff in this patch that I barely have even had time to talk about the Izumo. But you've gotten to see some Izumo action here anyway. And this was, like I said, it was nice to have this kind of team play and this kind of communication going in amongst a bunch of just random teammates, and everybody worked together rather nicely. And as you can see, I actually have also racked up a decent amount of damage. Not spectacular, but it's actually very nearly the best damage I've had in this ship. I think my very best damage game so far has been something like 111k. Honestly, I mean, the guns are good, but just the nature of this turret configuration means that it's a struggle to do quite as much damage as I've been used to doing in things like the Tirpitz in the Amagi, just because it's harder to... Effectively, you've got less guns a lot of the time, because you have to stay angled. If you don't stay angled, you get spanked hard. And I think that's why people really don't like the Izumo, because it forces you into this really weird way of moving around the map that just does not apply to any other battleship. And it is... It's work. It's a lot of work. You have to constantly be thinking about your angling, which you should be in a battleship anyway, but even more so in the Izumo, because even trying to withdraw, like if you have to turn around and sail away from people, okay, you can't fire at them. You can maybe angle out enough so you can get some of your turrets, but your arse is so much more vulnerable than your front, so you have to keep your front to the enemy as much as humanly possible, and sometimes that involves driving around the map in really strange ways, and especially if you're inching forward slowly, that makes you then very vulnerable to torpedo bombers and destroyers potentially. I've been caught out a couple of times where I've just been trying to keep my bow towards some very powerful enemies, like, you know, Montanas and Yamatos and other battleships, and suddenly, oh look, there's a bunch of torpedoes, and I can't dodge those because I'm basically idling along at 7 knots. Oh well. So, yeah, I can see why people don't like this. I, however, don't hate it. It's also one of the ships that now has, regular ships, that has permanent camo that you can buy for doubloons. So I've actually done that because it's a long grind to the Yamato. It gives you plus 100% XP. Although I didn't have it on in this battle because I forgot to re-enable auto supply. But it's expensive. 4,000 doubloons for camouflage. Yeah, it is. I don't know what the camo on a tier 10 tank would be offhand in World of Tanks. But even though you're getting this benefit of 100% extra XP, I mean, it gives you more than the camo in World of Tanks does then, sure, but it's very expensive in comparison. So, yeah, for a lot of people, I don't think it's going to be worth it. But for some of these higher tier ships, maybe, just because they're going to be such a long grind to the tier 10s particularly. So, we'll see how it goes. It should speed things up anyway. So there we go. That was an Izumo game. It's a pity I didn't really have the time to actually sit and talk about the Izumo game, but you maybe got some flavour of the Izumo from this. I've had a lot of games like this, and this one, like I said, was unusual because of the amount of cooperation on display, but still, yeah, this was not unusual in terms of how it played and just the awkwardness of always having to keep people towards your front and having to play with your speed a lot, and the wiggling you have to do to try and avoid destroyers without showing too much side to anybody. And yeah, it's hard work. It's a lot of work, this ship, and I can see why people don't love it. But you know me, I'm special. I like to love the old ones. Not that I'm saying I love this one, but by the time I get to the Yamato, who knows, I might be raving about it. Anyway, so hopefully you found this overview helpful, informative, whatever. And if you have, you can leave any comments about it or the Izumo below. You can hit the like button, you can sub to my channel if you aren't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.